You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with Something Rather Than Nothing, and we have for this podcast Vin DiSanti of WOMP STOMP Films, Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow, amongst other bits, continuing the Friday the 13th tradition in films, and Bonita Rancliffe, horror film buff, a friend of mine, and serving this episode as Something Rather Than Nothing's co-host. Welcome, Bo. Welcome, Vin.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to have you here, Bo. Vin, so we're talking Friday 13th. We're jumping right in here, but we want to talk about when you were younger. I mean, were you into horror movies? Were you into filmmaking, art? What were you like?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little hellraiser. I mean, I feel bad because I'm, with someone in the teachers union, and I was kind of one of those like troublemakers in school that was always down in like the planning room, as we called it, trying to figure out better ways. The planning room. Yeah. And so I spent a lot of time down there really just being this creative kid because I think I was one of those undiagnosed ADHD, I was all over the place. I was, reenacting things from movies and, making the class laugh. But when you put me by myself and you gave me some things to do, I would, create art. And, a lot of it was inspired by horror movies. My mom was a big fan of Stephen King and horror movies and things like that. So we had that stuff around the house, and I was watching horror movies very early. And watching, more adult type films, like not like adult films, but more like, PG-13, rated R. There was no really restriction in the things that I could see. So, I kind of just got this like full on view of the world, the way that it came through media. And obviously like media is very powerful. It had a big influence on me. I used to love like reenacting scenes and recreating scenes and stuff like that, video projects, anything that like had an art sort of flair to it. I kind of jumped on it and loved to kind of get my hands dirty and tell stories. And that's really where, I think as I started to mature in school and get older, I found, a love for storytelling. I eventually went into to study journalism. Was actually my first career choice when I entered college, and first major that I started working towards. Spent a lot of time writing and telling stories, and found that I kind of had more of a fascination with the film side of it. It wasn't just like, I realized like when I got into the film studio and the TV broadcast studio at school, I was kind of like, oh, I want to use the equipment and make stuff and like not just do the standard thing, but kind of push the envelope and make people laugh or, make or scare somebody. And, I think I realized I was like, what, maybe I should be, looking at more creative arts. Not so much journalistic, and that's when I made my switch to, full-time to film and TV production, and that's when I really kind of started to pursue the career I'm after now.
Yeah, well, and thanks for that. It was great to kind of hear your development in contact, with film, but also looking at other things that that you were interested in. Is film the dominant for you as an artist? Is film the dominant form that you do and perform and use?
Yeah, I mean, film is what I've worked in for the last now 12 or 13 years. I moved to LA in 2008. I've worked in various facets of it. I got my start in basically in VFX production, where I was just on the production team working on Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and then I moved along into commercials, and then eventually feature animation, where I spent a majority of my career working on the production teams of small independent animated films. I worked on 3 of those. And then after that was when I kind of had this inclination that I was working in animation. I was working my way up. I kind of had a knack for what I did, running teams. And I worked a lot with the editorial departments, which is what I studied in school most closely. And then I learned a lot along the way about, animation and story and script writing and development, because I spent a lot of time with those teams during those years. So it was not only just doing the story and editorial, but it was development, it was directing assistant. And my love for storytelling kept urging me, and I kept kind of hearing this calling that I really wanted to direct. I really wanted to have a chance to helm something creatively, and kind of find a singular story that people would rally around and want to make. And so, lo and behold, a few years go by, and that opportunity turned into the Never Hike Alone project.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to mention, Vin, as far as I know I've shared with Bo, your films with the Friday the 13th universe. And one of the things I wanted to say, so I don't forget or have it lost, is that um, first of all, these films are just incredible. They're so great. I mean, I think you do a nice nod and tip of the hat to people who love the Friday the 13th universe. That includes myself. Um, but they're such fantastic films of speaking to fans, but even as as they stand by themselves. Were you, and given that you've distributed these, as independent, and a lot of people have viewed these through YouTube, I mean, is there any sense you've been surprised at the amount of attention or views, etc., of people finding your films? Has that surprised you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the outcome of it surprised me in a big way. I mean, the goal, I mean, right at the beginning when we were doing this, it's like we knew that the potential for a lot of views was there. We had seen other Friday the 13th fan films that were online for, a decade that had, grossed 1 million views. And to me, that was something very special. I mean, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, they did a fan film, and, over the time, it's been viewed 1 million times. That's pretty cool over a 10-year span. So if that's a couple thousand or 10,000 a year, that's impressive. That might be cool to do if we can make something of that equal stature that people would want to watch. We know that there's people who are going to watch it. As filmmakers and artists, what's the one thing that we want more than anything? It's other people to come in and look at what we've done, whether it's music or art or film. We, eventually the goal is to put it up on a big screen and show it to everybody. And if you're a good director, your goal is to get reactions out of people, and those reactions should be good reactions in some way, shape, or form. It's not that everyone has to walk out like the hero always has to win or anything like that, but you should get reactions out of your audience in the similar way that I remember, when I was in college, Saw had come out. And that has such a great twist ending that I didn't see coming. I mean, I was a young college student. I didn't have, maybe I would have saw it coming clearer as an adult. But at that time, I remember like being really blown away by that. And I was blown away so much by it that I brought my friends back to the theater to watch the film. And when it came to that moment, I turned around. I didn't watch I knew it was going to happen. I knew he was going to stand up. And it was the look on their faces that it really ingrained in my mind of, if you make a movie that's going to mean something, somebody has to make this face at some point. So that you've raised the bar of their day in a way. Like, they watched something they didn't expect, and something was delivered that they didn't expect. Especially when you look at something along the lines of a Friday the 13th fan film, where at the time the bar was set at, the most accomplished fan films at the time were completed in 2008, 2009, 2010. So you have some of the digital technology, but it's not quite there. It's filmed on like high-end DV cameras, which are great for documentaries, but they're not great for telling, theatrical style stories. It's not, shooting at the right frame rate. It's not capturing it with the right, focal length, depth. It doesn't have those things that, we attribute to what a feature film is. And so when we approach Never Hike Alone, we wanted to approach it in a way that we're going to shoot it with the same tools that are going to replicate a filmic look. And, luckily for us in 2016 and 2017, there are cameras like Blackmagic's, which we started with, and then we moved over to the Sony A7S II, which became the first camera that we really leaned on to create a cinematic look. And with that, we created our first few trailers. We shot half the film. And we were able to kind of capture what we thought could be a very, theatrical presentation, which is what we were trying to do. We love Friday the 13th, and I really wanted to tell a Friday the 13th story, but I was also after this kind of, brass ring of quality. And I was like, everything that I had sort of tried to make previously, or I had worked on with other people, there was always this feeling of, it's shot like a feature film, but there's something missing. There's this extra layer that of production quality that we're not quite figuring out yet. And how are we going to do that? And for us, it was this whole entire journey has been two things. It's what types of stories can we tell with Friday the 13th that aren't the typical formula, but play into a lot of the themes that went unexplored throughout the 12, films that were released, like these golden nuggets of stories that you could follow if you really wanted to, but it didn't necessarily, follow the formula of Friday the 13th. So it would never be really considered for something like that. So we wanted to explore stories like that. That's where Never Hike Alone came from, Never Hike in the Snow. They're very personable, character-driven stories that don't necessarily play by the rules when it comes to Friday the 13th. And at the same time, we're taking, the elements that are, that we have at our most availability, which were these cameras, and using, today's technology, digital cinema, to recreate what it took hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to make in 1980 through 1993. And then when they made the other films in 2003 and 2009, I mean, $1 million films to create that type of look could be recreated for $10,000. Like that's was the goal. And not to say that we had everything that matched that, but we got it pretty close. And I think with Never Hike in the Snow, we really started to, match what we needed to be to say, okay, our goal, yes, we've been having a lot of fun making Friday the 13th films, but we also want to make original content. And if our original content can look like that too, let's start, really starting to expand our boundaries. And so that's really been the goal with our company since these films is, continue making these films, have a lot of fun doing it. But now we're like starting to realize it's like, okay, we have the tools, we have the workflow, we have, the pipeline to get something that looks like that out into the world. So how do we use this pipeline to create as much, quality content as possible? And then now you kind of throw a global pandemic on top of it and a lot of questions about how does the independent film move forward. That's really kind of threw a curveball at us this year. And so that's what we've been really trying to deal with for the last I would say 8 months, is saying, okay, we were about to step into some of these original projects and we had other ideas for Never Hike Alone and that we were going to pursue, but how do we pursue it in this environment? What is the safest way to do it? And so it's been really, it's been a really challenging year for us.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your explanation, Vin, and I can definitely see. I mean, I can say, as far as your intent as an artist, I mean, this might be useful. It's like I see what you're doing with that, and I can intimate some of the things that you've run into in this environment. But it's really exciting film to watch. It just is, and I know Bo, you're over there as co-host. You gotta have about 2 billion questions. I have about a few. Bo, why don't you have that at Vin? I know you had some questions about horror and otherwise, but
Yeah.
well,
Well,
yeah.
I just say, like, I think that's something that struck me as a fan watching it was the quality not only of the cinema but of the practical effects. That it was really, I think that's something that stood out to me was just the amount of quality, not only in horror in general, but as something that is, put out to the public free to consume on YouTube. I think that you guys just did an amazing job.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, a lot of credit goes to our artists. Those include Kelsey Burke, who worked on Never Hike Alone. She was the lead artist there, did a majority of the work. The Never Hike in the Snow was a collaborative effort. It was led by Nora Hewitt, who some people may remember from Face Off, I believe season 9. She won. She's a student of Tom Savini. She went to the Savini School of Art, or the that makeup effects school. I believe it's in Pennsylvania. And yeah, I mean, she's a fantastic artist. She was just recently married to the second of that film, which was which was Rachel, and now they're married. So they kind of worked as a team to get that whole thing done. And we had a lot of help from another artist by the name of Bill Hunt. Bill Hunt was an actual development and VFX artist on Jason Goes to Hell, and he's become a good friend of mine, and he helped us out pro bono for the most part to do these like concept paintings and concept drawings. So it kind of started with us talking about what we wanted to do and all that stuff. And really, my philosophy when it comes down to that, it's, with our films, it's we'd rather pay for one great thing that looks awesome and really kind of raises the level than sprinkle it out between a bunch of mediocre types of looks. So the idea was to go big or go home with each thing and then see how much we kind of had left over. And with each one, it has its own challenges. So we knew that when it came time to the gore, that the best practical effect that we could create on screen was going to be important. And so I think for the most part, we really hired two of the best people that we really could get, and we're lucky to have them.
Yeah, that and thanks for giving some more of the background of the other artists that were involved. I got a question for you, Vin. In a pandemic, what's the role of a horror film? Did it feel, I mean, I know there are practical difficulties in putting it out. As a horror film in a time of horror, I mean, did any of that come up, or how to get it done, or whether people want to be scared in a time of fear, or any of that
I
come up?
mean, for Never Hike in the Snow, it was really funny. Never Hike in the Snow has a lot of themes that kind of echoed the year, which was really funny. People not being able to agree on how to solve an issue, and thus that issue gets even worse. It's like, it's really funny, if you kind of look at it from that perspective. But I mean, for us, like, we were really lucky to finish filming when we did. It was a week before the first announced lockdowns. And prior to that, leading up to it, I mean, we were really kind of like, oh, this is another like swine flu. You know what I mean? It's like, it's going to go away in 3 weeks. And, it's the next kind of thing. And it wasn't until they actually announced a lockdown that we were like, whoa, we're really lucky that we didn't get locked down sooner. And, we ended up having some challenges along the way. We had, a crew member lose a family member along the way. And so we kind of shut down for a while, and we spent the year working on it. And it took like a lot of work to get it into shape. And it was really challenging because it wasn't the same. It wasn't like, hey, I'm coming over and we're going to hang out for, 10 hours and just cut this thing. It was like our time together was really limited, and we had to limit our interactions. And there was, real life things going on and us trying to figure things out. But by the time we got to October, I know that horror fans were dying for content. And I mean, I'm kind of proud for the fact that like we comboed with some other people. We ended up helping out with another film called Happy Halloween. And from October 13th to October 16th, I mean, WOMP STOMP Films had a big impact on this year's Halloween kind of celebration. We brought, some really high level, dark, story tones. Looking back on it, as I was going into it, I was like, I didn't expect us to all be in such a dark place. This is a really dark film. And I wonder how it's going to be received. And, for the most part, people loved it. And, then there's the other part that didn't realize that it's a pilot episode for, additional content. And, there was a lot of confusion to try to wrangle. But, it just kind of goes to show the challenge of doing something that, the people who are in this, the people who have been following, they understand, and they've been kind of following along, and they were the ones who I think were the most happy. And there are people who kind of following along who are confused. And so it's, it's a weird journey that we're on, because again, going back to like a previous question, it's like, we didn't anticipate this to build so much momentum. This was only supposed to be this one thing that we're like, oh, this is great. And we didn't realize that there was a potential to keep doing it. And now that potential has, kind of, caught up, and it's like, wow, it's like, here we are. And now we know what we can do. Now how do we progress with these new challenges? It's like, we just got done kind of figuring out a lot of things on the last film, and now there are new challenges on top of where we want to go, building bigger scope and scale. And, constantly increasing our production value and doing that. And then also trying to, weigh the cost of filming in a pandemic. the safety of filming in a pandemic. What happens when an independent film gets shut down because someone gets sick? It's a lot different than when a multinational corporation has to shut down a project for a few weeks. Yeah, I mean, they're actually paying way more than we are, but they can, those are numbers that they can throw around and
Yeah.
and weigh that load. I mean, and some of them may not even be able to, some of the mid-range stuff. So for us, we want to be really careful. I mean, that's one reason why, aside from, coming through with the production, I mean, with the fulfillments for the Indiegogo that we've done, our main focus has been building an animated movie, which has been a lot of fun. It's actually called Ghost Chicken, and it's about a vegan restaurant that's haunted by the ghost of a chicken. And so
Dang.
it's this fun, kind of animated. It's my trip back into animation. It's something that's allowed me to work from home, work remote with a lot of other artists and people who are helping us create this venture. I'm actually in the animatic phase, so I have all my storyboards, and I'm starting to record voices, and we're recording people from a distance, and bringing them in and building the project, and it's been a lot of fun, as a way to pass the time and something that I can do while other things are out of my control. And so, yeah, when life gives you lemons, you adapt and you find a way to make lemonade. And so this little project has become like our island of rescue, to just be like, at least we can make something. It's like we're working on something, and it's different. And not that I don't love Friday the 13th, but it's not Friday the 13th. It's something of like that we came up with. That's our thing, and no one knows what this is, and we can be really mysterious about it, and we can take our time with it. And so that, as this thing develops, we're really excited to present another side of Womp Stomp Films that people haven't seen before, and diversify the type of content we can provide.
Yeah. Hey, Bo, I think Vin DiSanti is Santa Claus. I mean, he started with our Halloween. He was correct in saying horror fans were dying. We were literally just waiting and waiting and waiting, and we got that. And to hear about these projects is fantastic. I would say, hey Vin, the touching moment in there, in a time of great upheaval and difficulty with the pandemic and the horror film, of course, Mrs. Voorhees comforting Jason. Those touching moments you have delivered to help.
Yeah.
To help us all.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, that was one of the last scenes that got written into the movie, and it's a scene that I've actually thought about for a long time. It's this kind of scene that's lived up in my head, and I always said, oh, this is one for one of these things, and I'm just going to keep it tucked back there, and when the time is right, I know I'll use it. And there's a lot of themes that are being set up for the overall story, some of the bigger things. But we have to remember that this story all started with, a mother who lost a son, and Never Hike in the Snow is, primarily about a mother who lost her son, and a son who was taken from his mother. And, the people who are caught in between. And so there's this bigger story there. And, in the middle of it, as we've been telling this story about Jason, it started with Never Hike Alone, and we kind of touched upon it. And then we did the Disappear music video, which really kind of opened up a different side to Jason. It opened up kind of a look into his world, and we wanted to take an even further step in Never Hike in the Snow. And, at the end of the day, when sometimes people ask, like, well, who's the main character of this movie? I mean, I think if you really look at it, Jason might be the main character of the movie. There's lots of people sharing that role. They're passing it on to each other. Rick has a strong, presence as we carry through with his story. Mark has his own through line, but really the connective tissue between everybody is Jason. Jason is the through line, and we see what I think the first time is what is Jason fighting for? What is Jason protecting? What is all this trouble worth to Jason? And when you boil it down, it's that moment. It's that moment of being, drawn into that memory, drawn into whatever is making him see these things and hear these things the same way that Pamela Voorhees heard his voice. We wanted to draw on that, and the concept of like Tommy having visions and being driven insane, and this thought of like the curse is like, once you're cursed, it sticks with you. So we have Kyle in Never Hike Alone. He sees visions of Jason before Jason arrives because Jason is haunting him now. Jason knows exactly where he is, and he's closing in. And as long as, Kyle lives, as long as Tommy lives, as long as all these survivors live, Jason is somehow haunting them in some way, and they all just deal with it in different ways. But at the core of this concept is, what does Jason see? How does Jason react to this? Is Jason projecting himself through time and space to go haunt these people? Or is there a bigger force at work here that's also working on Jason, showing him his mother and drawing him into this conflict? And it's something that might be bigger than the whole, thing. But all he knows is that he is just serving his mother, and it was a great representation of that. And I think it was a moment to realize, what Jason is at his core, what Pamela is at her core. But seeing but the funniest thing about that is that, they're having this beautiful moment, but surrounding them are dead bodies. You have the dead body of Mark right there. There's another dead body behind Mark from the Disappear music video. There's dead bodies on the bed that are under those tarps. And so it's like this wake of death for this relationship and what Jason is protecting. And you see that he's willing to go to any length to protect this one lasting, connection that he has with his mother. Whatever this connection is, it's the closest thing he'll ever get. And if this is what he gets for doing his job, then he'll continue to do it. And I think that that's a cool kind of introspective look at the way that Jason may be the villain in these films, but he may also be just as cursed as everyone else, because eventually, when you really look at it, it all started with this 11-year-old boy who just wanted to go for a swim. So it's something that the films really don't look at. It's not that they dive into. I mean, part 8 kind of really haphazardly dove into these waters to try and cover, the story of like this drowning boy with drowning Rennie and all this stuff. But it was really not. It wasn't. It was kind of hokey in a way. And, I wanted an opportunity as a fan to be like, listen, like if you strip away all kind of like the bubblegum wrap from this thing and you go to the core stories, there's actually really like strong story arcs here if you just put them together correctly. And if you just weed out kind of all the nonsense, that there actually is a scary story here, but it's also emotional. And it's, and it's tense, and there's a lot of things kind of going on, and it's complex, and it can be, it can be a lot more than just kind of what we had seen from the other films. And it's not that those films don't have their value and they haven't been enjoyed and they won't continue to be enjoyed. It's just, for the sake of argument, I think really what it is, it's like, what happens if we make it like with a little bit more quality? What would happen? Would it get better? Would it get worse? Would it be goofy? And, we are taking those risks, but we're finding that like, it really does stand up, and these themes really can work if we have the opportunity to tell them.
Yeah, and I want to zero in on a component of that as you describe it, because your description, you're distilling down those story elements in some of those that have long fascinated me, but also developing them. And I think it's connected to horror in art. And this is the question for you, Vin. Is the main question quite simply is, what is art? But I was wondering if you could comment in the answer to the question about what is art is a little bit more of the role of how we view art or film or otherwise when it's like horror or science fiction. There's something about us when I think people get tripped up critically on it. And as a horror film maker, amongst the other things that you do, what is art?
Well, I mean, I think that art is an expression of emotion in some way, shape, or form. That's how I've always tried to steer my art, is what emotion am I most feeling with this piece, and how do I represent that with visuals? It's a visual art, so we create visuals to, say things without, show it, don't say it. That's kind of the way that I go at it. And every, with music, obviously it's all sound, and, with art, it's the single image capturing a lot in just one pose or one canvas, you know what I mean, to say a lot of things. But I think at the end of the day, we're all looking at some type of emotion that we're driven by. So specifically with horror, it's fear. It's this, like, we want to be scared. We want to look beyond the fray. We have a curiosity. We have, there's lots of themes that can, exploration of the unknown. There's a lot of things in the horror world that scare people. You know what I mean? The scare. I mean, most of the thing is the being scared of the unknown, the things that can't be explained. And the more you try to explain it, the weirder things get, and that's usually indicative of a good horror film. No matter how much a character thinks they have a situation under control, the situation continues to spiral out of control. And as viewers of art and cinema, we want to go on that ride. We want to, we want to bring everything to the edge, but at the end of the day, it's the characters on screen that are going to have to deal with the consequences, and we just react to how it makes us feel. So when you're a director and you're designing the ride, I mean, that's how I think about it. I think about a film like a roller coaster. It's like, what part of the roller coaster are we on right now? Like, not everything can be a loop-de-loop. Not everything can be a straight drop. Sometimes you need something that's leveled out just to kind of reset the palette. And being able to pace that out so it really kind of delivers. And at the end of the day, whatever that emotion is, whatever we're making people feel, it's really down to the fine tuning of all those elements, at least in film, working together to deliver that sound, communication to people. We're emitting that emotion. People should be feeling that emotion. And I think when people have criticisms, it's because they're either looking for another emotion that's not the emotion that they want to be told right now. Like, I could understand if someone watched, Never Hike in the Snow and said, this is way too depressing for me in a pandemic. This would be great if I was looking for something that was dark and depressing, and maybe it's cathartic to even feel it and feel like another character and how they react to the same situation and stuff like that. There's different ways that we can interpret it. And I think that, like, what a good viewer can do is, a lot of, we tend to do this a lot and I'm definitely just as guilty of it as anybody, is, setting an expectation for a film and saying, okay, if the film's gonna be good, it has to be this, rather than watching a film and saying, what is it trying to say, and do I like this? You know what I mean? And there's also, and that's just my view of it. There are other films out there that, there's no theme, there's barely a story. It's just a character, going around and doing crazy things. And one of the kind of early, advice that I got when I was getting into this industry was that, the power of character, in film. In film,
Yeah.
you can have a lot of great cinematography and story, but if you don't have a powerful character that your audience can all rally around, you're going to have a hard time delivering on everything else. And a great character can make up for a lot of shortcomings in all the other departments. And so it's really about the character, and it's about, does it resonate with people? And those characters and the emotions that they make people feel are very important, and it's something that you have to take a lot of time to analyze while you're creating something. Whatever the focal point is, it's got to be, in film, it's character. And you can do other things too. I'm sure there's ways around it, but these are just kind of the tools that I lean on when I'm telling stories, is to be character centric, and then put it on a good story track, and make sure that the pacing leads into, an emotional resolution or an emotional charge. It's meant to do certain things and leave people with certain emotions. And are people going to be satisfied with the material enough that even if it's like Never Hike in the Snow, like, you have that feeling like you want more, or you got to know what happens next, that, it's a good feeling of, I want to know what happens next, and be like, wait, that's it. It's like, oh, like, well, what I watched wasn't good, and I didn't even get any good stuff. It's like, wow, that was great. Now I want more. It's that was kind of the goal. And so to see a lot of people having that reaction, it's like, it's more of a mixed reaction, but it's a positive mixed reaction, because it kind of highlights, that we did, that we're on the right track, and that these projects really do need the right type of support and funding, and that when we get it, like, we can deliver. And so that's really kind of the ebb and flow of this process, and getting people to buy into it, because it's not as satisfying as, getting something on Netflix that you can watch all 8 episodes all at once. This isn't, we're not on the same money stream that Netflix is on or that Hulu is on or stuff like that. We're, we can only make this so fast. And that's, I think, the most frustrating start of our process is the fact that it takes so long to make these things. So if it's going to take this long and it's going to cost us that much amount of money, we have to make sure that that product, no matter how long, short, whatever, it just has to deliver on the fact that if it hits an emotion, if it hits the right chords with people, and we're able to if we're able to make people sad when we lose Mark after and go and meet his mother, or we have that moment when Jason and his mother embrace, or that people genuinely get scared when Mabry goes into the attic at the end of the movie and we see Jason in this, we see a cop try to arrest Jason, which is like hilarious and terrifying at the same time. And then, his, unbelievable demise. Like, we really, like, at the end, it was all about like, okay, I'm going to make people sad. I'm going to bring it back with Jason and his mother. We're going to get excited. And then we're going to try and build a really scary sequence for Halloween, because last year it was all about the fighting and, the more of the build of tension and kind of like these like adventure sequences, because Never Hike Alone was more of an adventure movie. I was like, in this one, we really want to go horror. Like, I really want the tones to be scary. I want this to feel like what we did in Never Hike Alone, but now we could follow through with the kill because we don't need this character in the next movie. This one's expendable. So we can actually kill this guy. And how could we do it in a way that would bring something fresh to Friday the 13th, a kill that we haven't seen before. We've never seen Jason use, a firearm on anybody. And it's not that he pulls the trigger, but he gets the guy to blow his own head off. And so that's something, and he moves so fast in that moment that I think it's scary. And we wanted to, like, I really wanted that Saw moment at the end of Never Hike in the Snow. And I know for the most part I got it, because watching all the reaction videos, everybody's face is like, oh my God, like, and like, it's shocking. And I wanted to shock people. And then I was leaving it off there. It's like, it would be great if we could just jump into the next part of the story. But, the next stage of this story happens 3 months later in the spring. And by the time we were getting to that level, we were all in full lockdown. So there was going to be no additional filming this year. And so we just went with what we had. And we knew that we were going to address things in later episodes. So we were just like, you know what? It's like, we have it covered. Like, it would just be bonus stuff at this point. This is the story. This is the story about how Jason gets away with it. It answers a question. It's like, for all these years, what's a circumstance in which Jason has killed somebody and gotten away with it? Because all the movies are about the times that Jason goes to kill people and doesn't get away with it. By the end of the movie, he gets his comeuppance. And I wanted to show a movie that he didn't get his comeuppance, that he's able to still exist out there. And that's what the original Never Hike Alone was supposed to be. It just so happened that, Andrew was so likable as Kyle that we couldn't kill him. We couldn't bring ourselves to end him. And we added Tommy to the end of it. So we kind of had this, we had to morph it into something else. Because that was supposed to be the story of the people who go in and don't come out. And that's what Never Hike Alone was supposed to be about. And so we kind of went back to the drawing board with it on Never Hike in the Snow. And we're like, let's tell that story, with these characters. Let's show how Jason is able to get away with these murders and not be found, about how he's always one step ahead of the police, always one step ahead of Tommy, how the conflict between Tommy and Rick is really allowing him to thrive, because neither, one has a plan that's supposed to work, but it doesn't really work. And then the other one tries to enact his plan, but it doesn't, he doesn't have any support, and he never seems to be able to follow through on the one thing, which is find Jason. So it's like we have this Don Quixote Tommy Jarvis who's out there, jousting at windmills and can't find the actual dragon. And then you have this governing Barty that's like, stop running after windmills, because eventually you're going to end up in the right one, and then all hell's going to break loose and it's going to be all your fault. You know what I mean? Like, so why don't you just leave it alone? And if somebody happens to wander into the wrong windmill, that's on them, because we put up all the signs and we did all our due diligence. And these are the themes that we continue on in the story, but we wanted to set them up, without, having to do long dialogue scenes and, have it explained to the audience. We just wanted to present situations in which this is how it plays out. And as we go on, the pieces will fit when you start to see how, when they have these, these arguments over ideology, eventually, the wrecking ball in the whole situation is Kyle MacLeod. And Kyle MacLeod is the one who gets out now.
Right.
Originally he just got his head crushed, but he gets out, and now Jason has something to lose. Now we know what's at risk for Jason. If they come back, it's not going to be good. Jason has been kind of chased to the last corner, and they know that he's out there. The kid has proof that he's out there, and there's going to be no more hiding. The people are going to come with pitchforks, and it's better to bring the fight to them. And so the worst nightmare of Rick is happening. Jason is coming to town, and it's not because of Tommy, it's because of Kyle. And the problem is that Rick said, well, if they wander in there and they don't come out, that's their own problem. The problem is what happens if one of them make it out? You know what I mean? Jason's coming after them, and he's going to bring them after us. There might not be Tommy. It might be somebody else, and that's what Tommy's trying to tell him. But Rick doesn't want to
Sure.
hear it, because it's worked. So far, Rick's plan, for the most part, there's people who have died, but he hasn't had a Friday the 13th massacre in over 25 years. You know what I mean? It's been quiet. People have gone missing, but people go missing all the time everywhere. So, he really can't attribute it to anything more than that, and is happy to live blissfully in that lie. And Tommy's not. And so it's kind of a cool, look at how life would have continued on in Friday the 13th as if they actually followed Tommy's story, and if they actually followed, the events of part 6, and what was the kind of the fallout of all these years once Jason kind of is banished for a long time. And I in our series, we count part 7 and part 8 as, events. They happened in some way, shape, or form, and that's how Jason was released again. But at some point after the quote unquote Manhattan incident, he had to come back to Camp Crystal Lake and start a new life. And so this is what our Jason is. Our Jason is the post-Paramount, the fork in the road. They went to, New Line took it to Jason Goes to Hell, where it's like, well, that's where you went. But if this storyline continued forward, and we looked back through these 8 films, and we said, okay, if we washed away all kind of the studio bullshit and the mandate of the formula, what are the coolest stories in between that we've always wanted to know about? And what are the facts that really make it the strongest type of story versus things that muddy the situation? And we narrowed it down and kind of built it up from there. And so we've built this world on top of Tommy now, and this existing kind of our version of Jason we call Ghost Jason. And how Jason would exist is this kind of revenant that haunts these woods and is just trying to protect himself now. Is gone back to more that part 2 style Jason, to where it's not about going out into the world and inflicting damage, but rather just defending territory, which is where I think most people kind of think of Jason, subconsciously. I don't think that they, even though he doesn't really act like that in the movies, most of us kind of assume like, oh yeah, Jason just protects his land and, does, if you go in, you're going to get killed. And that's the story of Friday the 13th is that, the camp's cursed. But that's not necessarily the way most of the films treat it. It's kind of like they just kind of retrofit it to do whatever they want. So we wanted to do something that played by all the best rules in the franchise, and then saw what happened when you kind of put all those elements together.
Yeah, I remember even on the remake, the Friday the 13th, of the same title, Friday the 13th, there was a little bit of an emergence of more intelligent planning, booby-trapped, Crystal Lake is the idea of protector or keeping off of it. But you definitely work on the more, I definitely see where you place it as far as how you develop it out as more of the protector of the lands are trying to maintain
and
those
this one
lands.
is less about even the camp itself and more about his existence. It's staying hidden. And that's where I would say our Jason is different than the remake Jason, because the remake Jason is a little bit more proactive than our Jason is. Our Jason wouldn't, randomly fire on people driving a boat. You know what I mean? He wouldn't draw that sort of attention to himself. He wouldn't go into a barn during the day. It's a step up on that. It was there are a lot of great themes here, but if you really think about it, it could be better. And we try to take those elements and say like, okay, what happens if we did like what they did, but we did it with a little bit more, like we've had, hindsight's 2020 in a way. It's like now that we've seen it, it needs a little bit more thought than this. This is a little thinly veiled. So that's where we really kind of, elements from 2009 that had the right idea in it, because I was really excited for 2009 when it came out. I really do like a lot of the themes that are kind of presented. I think the follow through on a lot of it kind of gets lost along the way. That's kind of like my biggest criticism of it, is that it's like there's a lot of great ideas here, but they kind of fall apart after a while, and then it just becomes like a hootenanny hoedown with Jason, and he's just chasing everybody around at one point. They're like his all strategy kind of goes out the window at that point, and it's just like a 5-tier final girl chase, like with people running in all directions, rather than like seeing a newer, smarter Jason systematically take people out who don't even know that he's out there until it, kind of like that part 2, which I think is like the greatest, those setups where it's like, it's Ginny and Paul, and it's just the two of them, and then they come back and everybody's dead, and it's just those two against Jason, and it's isolated.
Right.
Part 4, they add the element of Rob, Tommy, and Trish, and so, but it's Trish and Rob that go into the house, and Tommy stays behind, and that element of like the couple taking on Jason at the end, the boyfriend going down, and then it's just down to the final girl and her little brother. There's an element to like the escalation in those films that I feel that's where 2009 loses its edge, because it just becomes kind of this free for all. And it was a different approach, and it's a different style, and I think that a lot of people really do appreciate it. And I think with our Jason, where we try to kind of be a little bit different, is be more tactile and stealthy, kind of like that that part 4 Ted White Jason, who was always there in the right moment to take out the person he needed to take out and then move on to the next person and really kind of take people down, because I think that's scarier. And that's just kind of my opinion on that, but I think that's where my kind of thought is on it.
Yeah, and we're speaking with Vin DiSanti of WOMP STOMP Films. Never Hike Alone, Never Hike in the Snow. Talking a lot of mythology and creativity within the Friday the 13th universe. And Bo, I know you had a question or two. I know I'm not going to tell you. I know you're interested in some of the practical effects and other aspects of horror. I wonder if you want to pop in another question at our man Vin.
Yeah, of course. I think that you kind of really hit it on the head there as a fan of horror, right? To be able to tell some kind of powerful story, that it's not just, running through the woods and getting to see those great kill scenes, although I enjoy that as well.
Yeah.
But I think a bigger question maybe is like, why is it that you create, and more specifically, why horror? Especially, when you ask people, nobody ever says, oh, I hate comedy movies, or I hate, drama. But you do have people that come out and say, no, horror is not for me. I don't really like it. So why in particular do you choose as a creator to use horror?
I mean, I like it. I mean, I love the horror franchise. I love horror. I love comedy. I love drama. I plan on making lots of different types of films over my career. But horror is, a place where I think I have strong storytelling abilities. I've always just been a storyteller. I've always loved, when someone's like, "What happened last night?" Like that was like my cue. You know what I mean? I would stand up and I would do impressionations of everybody and reenact the entire night. Or if somebody wanted to know a movie, I would reenact the entire movie. I just love the act of storytelling, and I love the effect that it has on people. It's something that, like, when you can brighten someone's day with a story, it's a cool feeling to have. And so, I like doing it. And it's just one of those things that I kind of just over time realized I had a passion and a knack for it. And so that's where, it kind of led me down this path. And so, with that, comes with it, to have that passion is one thing, but then it led me down the avenue of like, how do I do this? And a lot of that was watching behind the scenes featurettes when I was a kid, and watching the people who made the films, and seeing that like there was a whole crew and everyone has a different job, and what are those jobs and who does what. And my pursuit through film has been answering those questions that I had as a child. Who does what? How, who do I need to talk to go get, to go blow up someone's head? You know what I mean? It's like, who do I call? And so I think, after all these years of working, I've collected all my numbers. You know what I mean? Like from the start, being able to write, those are things that I can do myself, things that I was taught, things that I researched. Being able to contact story artists, or being able to contact actors, and a director of photography, and, a sound person, and gaffers, and, rent equipment and get the things to shoot it, and special effects people and all that, and having access to all of those people. But they're also my friends. They're people who I've worked with on other shows. So we all have this personal connection. And when we can all gather together to make something, it's I get to hang out with my friends. I get to be with the people who I really like being around. Like, I'm building a set of basically the people who I love working with most. It's really a privilege and an honor at that point. And we all get to be collaborative. And luckily for me, as a director, everyone kind of buys into what I'm doing. And it all starts with, every single person that works on these shows starts with me sitting down with them and reenacting the entire movie and saying, this is the movie. It starts here. And I mean, Never Hike in the Snow, I was acting that out for 2 years before we got to make it. I was like, it's going to start, and we're going to do the whole, like, and it's going to be like rad music, and like you're going to be cutting back and forth between him running. It's going to be in slow motion. And it'll be these cool, like, Robin Hood shots. And really just getting excited about, like, it's going to be so cool. I mean, it used to just be an idea in my head. It used to just be images in my head of thinking about how cool it would be to see Jason in the snow with a bow and arrow shooting this guy and then splitting his head in half. Mm-hmm. It's where the idea grew. And then, over time it evolved into, what happens afterwards? Where does it go from here? How does the people of Crystal, how do the people of Crystal Lake react to this? What are the dominoes that fall out, and how does Jason get away with this? And so that's how it all kind of started. And as far as like, and that's something you can only do in horror films. And of course, I'm a big Friday the 13th fan. My whole life, all I've ever wanted to do is work on a Friday the 13th movie officially. And if this is the closest I get, this is the closest I get. And I think that I wanted to, I want to do the franchise justice when I do this stuff. I don't just want to do it to do it. I want to do it so that it has impact. And that, like I said, when we first got into this, we looked at those other fan films and said, these, they have an impact. You know what I mean? It's like they have drawn attention, and this is a great expression of love for Friday the 13th. And I would love to contribute to this. And so, some of these contributions, some of these ideas, I think they're things that I don't think the studios will ever produce. And for me, as a Friday the 13th fan, a lot of these ideas I'm just like itching to share with everybody. I'm just passionate about the fact that, if I could tell this story, I really think there are a lot of Friday the 13th fans out there who would appreciate it, who would appreciate this point of view, would appreciate this lens on it. And if we can deliver on that will have a lot of impact, but it will also allow me to say what I want to say about Friday the 13th. And usually as fans, we're pretty voiceless in getting what we want from larger, entities that kind of guide their own way. And something as diverse and, non-linear as Friday the 13th is and has been, you never know what you're going to get. And it might be great. I mean, it might have some redeeming quality in some way, shape, or form. It might be a great retelling of the way that Friday the 13th used to be, and it may be a fun film, or it may be do, X, Y, or Z. But there's something just very specific about the story that I'm trying to tell that I feel like I don't think that they could ever do it. They could never pull the Tommy Jarvises of the world and, build this story up from him and, kind of bring this light back to like saying like, yes, this is the Paramount Jason that was from the original films. Wherever it's going to go, it's going to be from a fresh take. We're never going to get that resolution to the Paramount era Jason that, as much as I love Adam Marcus as a person, Jason Goes to Hell for a lot of fans did not satisfy that palate of saying, what happened to that Jason? Because this is not, no, Like, this is just something else. Like, this is like,
Right,
now we're
right.
getting into the what if, like the Marvel what if of like with Jason, if he was in the Evil Dead world. It's a cool
Right.
thing to look at. But I think that there's another way that we can end this other story without having to bring in the Necronomicon, to not having to bring anything out from outside forces, but actually looking at the elements within Friday the 13th that are there. It's just about activating them. It's just about calling them back. It's about bringing them and giving them purpose and using these things that exist within the film already without having to branch outside of what the franchise has already created, and at the same time, trim it back, prune the tree. It's like, it's gone wild, like we all know it has. You won't mind if I snip a few branches off, you won't even miss them, type thing. And I think that that's what Never Hike Alone proved, is that we cut a lot of the branches, and at the same time there's lots of continuity things that people don't understand are going on in a certain way. um, and that's why we wanted to tell more story, because it's like, no, if you really looked, like, if you can kind of get up to where like, again, I'm the guy with this movie, I've already watched it a million times in my head, and as a Friday the 13th fan, it gets me really excited. It makes me feel like, oh, if they could only deliver a movie like this, like, if they only had the forethought to like really put this much thought into it, um, it would really be special. And I think that like this would be such a great send off for this character, something that we really haven't had an opportunity to have for this character. And then we could go on to all the new ideas. You know what I mean? We can go on to all the stuff that's different and weird, and you can do whatever you want. But it's like, can we just have this one ending that allows us to kind of have closure with that specific character? Because we feel like it's, him washing out the drain at the end of part 8 is not, there's got to be a little bit more there. Like, where did that go? You know what I mean? And I have, what's developed out of this whole story is like this really great timeline of events. It's this really kind of tragic story of this monster, that it's poetic, it's sad, it's violent, and but it has a lot of heart to it, and there's a lot of different closure for different characters and closure for the town in a way. It introduces our new character of Kyle MacLeod and lets him be the fresh perspective in this ongoing story. The growing story of Anna Campbell's character, Diane Hill, and her, grieving the loss of her son and then getting whipped up into a Friday the 13th story of her own, and, emerging as like a really important, character that's there for Tommy and Kyle in this battle. And it really kind of becomes their story. And then Rick is the antagonist, like the second antagonist to Jason. And then the havoc that Jason's going to wreak throughout the town as he, gets closer to, his goal of, ridding the world of Kyle, this footage, and anyone else who gets in his way. And so there's clear, goals and themes at play, and there's resolutions that tie up in a bow. And it's, for the first time in Friday the 13th history, it feels like all the information that we've been fed kind of gets delivered in one package that just makes sense, and we all can kind of breathe easy and go, oh yeah, okay, that's how it could go. That feels like, that feels rewarding as after we've put in all these years. And then there's also the side of it that people just want to see Friday the 13th. It doesn't matter what form it comes in, just as long as Jason has a hockey mask and he's murdering people. That's what people want. And I get that. But at the same time, this is something that, like, I don't know. I have this instinct that tells me that if it was put together and put on screen, that the fan base would react to it in a really, invigorating way.
Yeah, and I think that's noticeable, and I really appreciate your comments on the universe as a whole, and a lot of the undeveloped bits that you talk about that have interested the fan base over time, and developing those and taking risks as far as where the story takes place. And I know on the initial
Mhm.
scene, without giving away, I think about with the initial kill. I know, like, when I was watching it, I was like, no way, like, because it was great, but it was such an evocative response of being like, I didn't know that could happen. And it was exciting to see as something, within film, where I've watched the films a real lot ever since I was younger, but kind of rejoicing in that kind of creative satisfaction you helped with the with presenting. Uh, Vin, I got a big question for you here. Why is there something rather than nothing?
What? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is that like just an introspective question in which to kind of like look inward
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's the big one. Jason, horror, everything.
oh man, I mean, I just it's when it comes to the world of horror, I guess it's just we always love um like I kind of said before, exploring the unknown. That's what story is. Story is a way to cope with existence. It's a way to put down on paper or to put up on screen thoughts and introspective views on the world, and introspective views on situations. And then it's also there just for entertainment. It's just to sit back and elect responses and, have people react, whether it be good or bad, whether it be positive or negative. It's stimulating our brain, because we thrive for it. I mean, if you think about the pandemic and staying home for the last 8 months and a lot of the issues that people had of a reduction of stimulation and the fact that we're not, going outside as much, that we're not interacting as much, that we're not, going on trips and journeys and adventures, this seeking out of we all start in a place and we always end up, most of us end up somewhere else. And some of us, never leave where we came from. And I think, for me anyway, I started in a little town in Massachusetts. I've traveled across the country, and I've lived in Los Angeles for the last 13 years. I've traveled the country and met horror fans at film conventions and horror conventions and film festivals. And, if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have turned that into a trip around the world, a place where, the amazing part is that making Never Hike Alone has given me this opportunity and an excuse to travel. It's before I was like, oh, I got to work, I got to do this, I got to do that, and now it's like I could take my film to England, I could take my film to Ireland, I could take my film to Germany, to Italy. I could take it over to New Zealand, Australia, and places where fan bases have popped up in Brazil, things like that, and it's really and it's all centered around this this same thing, Friday the 13th, horror films, this um, shared love that we all have for a genre, and we all sort of get it in the same way, and we were drawn to each other as fans to collectively, because that's what and that's the whole thing with, like, not to kind of jump the curb here, but to bring the concept of like things coming in on streaming and being released on streaming instead of going to the theaters, and having the option to stay home and watch it rather than go to the theater. It's like there is nothing like getting together with fans of like-minded fans to watch something. I mean, that's why we go to screenings of films that are 40 years old and pack the house. You know what I mean? Like, we have them on Blu-ray in 4K on our 75-inch TVs and all across the, no matter what you got.
Right.
We will happily go to a place where we can get popcorn and sit in a theater and have that shared experience. I don't understand why people are so afraid of the cinema experience dying rather than reinventing itself and getting better. The technology is going to get better. The situation in which you find yourself sitting in is going to get better. I just see more and more theaters turning into like Alamo draft houses where you can go and order a meal and, take in a movie on a giant screen that's been, the screen has been tested, the audio has been tested, and is being presented exactly how the filmmaker wants it. Quite often, I don't think people realize that when you go to the theater, I'm sure that there are filmmakers out there who would agree. It's like they can't test every single screen. They don't know how it's being shown in Ohio versus in Oklahoma versus in Europe. I
Sure.
mean, there might be a standard, but who knows the last time that specific place changed that bulb? Who knows the last time that they actually what are they doing to keep their theater at the forefront of what's going on? And I think that if anything, you're going to just have to see theaters rethink this thing so we can have this collective experience. So like, why something from nothing? It's the something is that community. And it's that shared experience that we all have. It's like films resonate with people because it's something that we can all relate to. It's something that, we all can, after the film, like almost share our own experience of what it made us think of or where it brings us to, or like have that same shared like for certain scenes and characters and things like that. It's something that we all share because we're all drawn sort of to the same thing. It's like we have the same taste. And I think anyone can attest, like staying home and not being able to share your thoughts about a film with somebody is, grueling. It's like, I can't tell you how many films I've watched and I've just been sitting here like flipping out, like, oh my God, like I never really
Right,
realized this.
right.
Did you know that? And like, it's like, like I got no one to talk to, but I'm having like these epiphany like moments when I'm watching these movies. Because it's just like, oh wow, like I never realized this or realized that, and having somebody to discuss that with. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really, I think that could round out, that question.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing at the end here, Vin, and I want to tell you, I really love listening to you in your process and talking about Friday 13th. It's been is a great pleasure. One of the things I want to do here at the end is kind of make sure some of the you can't just go out to the movie theater to see your films. Can you lay out for folks, for the listeners, where to find you, your films, how to interact or comment or anything along those lines, toward for your comfort?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, all of our projects are on our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/WompStompFilms, WOMPSTOMPFILMS. Our entire catalog's up there. Everything that I've made since I started filmmaking, starting with The Red Room, which was my first short film, all the way through Never Hike in the Snow. We have another film on there, Pathosis, which is our first original project that we released, which is directed by a good friend of mine, Austin Boning. One Genre Blast short film competition, which is pretty cool. And that's one of the top 50 genre film festivals in the country. So we're really proud of the film. We debuted at Telluride Horror Show with that one. So it's definitely one that, if you like creepy crawly movies about things that scare you in the dark, that's a really good one. All of our Friday the 13th content is there. And there's lots of other cool little like things that we've posted in the last few weeks. We posted another piece called The Ghost Cut, in which we cut all three Never Hike Alone pieces into one kind of feature-length anthology that lays them out in chronological order and kind of fills in some gaps on when things are happening. Some of the adds some new elements and things like that. There's a few new shots, some voiceovers, some special guest appearances. So you're definitely going to want to check that out if you're a big Friday the 13th fan. But for the most part, right now we're working on the fulfillment for the Never Hike in the Snow Blu-ray, which we're just waiting for the disc to arrive now so we can start shipping them out. And then after that, we're really going to turn our focus to Ghost Chicken. So you're definitely going to want to keep an eye out for updates on that as we progress. And you can do that on our Instagram, on our Facebook, on our Twitter, all at WompStomp Films. Which is pretty easy to find. You can find our logo and stuff like that. And if you ever want to email us, it's wompstompfilms@gmail.com.
All right, that's great. And Benita Rancliffe, Benita, thanks for joining as a co-host. I communicate with Benita around the thing that you need, Vin, as far as like need somebody to talk to about the film you just saw. I mean, I send messages to her saying, "We got to see this thing." When I was yelling, "No way!" at that Never Hike in the Snow, I'm like, I have to
Yeah.
send some messages out. Man, is this real?
Yeah, definitely. I think that sense of community and discussion is missed in these times for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
Well,
it's out there. It's
yeah.
just it's too bad that it's a lot of it has been driven to online, and I feel like the online version of it usually tends to get snarky and negative. and a lot of things get lost in context because it's in text and not, you don't hear someone's voice like messing around, like poking fun at something. It seems like, oh, they're really mad at it. You know what I mean? So you get like a lot of hot takes and stuff like that. I really miss, being able to sit down with people and have like a good hearty debate, or, disagreement, or even like likewise, like we both love it. Like I just miss having to have like the real nuanced conversation. It feels like everything online is just like cut down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you're right, Vin, and I think part of in Benita too is just as far as the community around a discussion like this. I think it's important to continue. I look forward to it in the future. I think you're right. I think our ability to engage in discourse is really difficult, and discourse is difficult. And I think these challenging questions are good. And I think questions about horror and art and all these type of things. I think a lot of us want to kick them around and learn more about it.
Mm.
Uh, uh, Vin DeSanti, WOMP Stomp Films. Again, thank you so much for joining the show. And I hope maybe we can all think of ways to connect going in the future. I know I personally enjoy watching, a film watch party online. Maybe we can comment about things of that nature, and just look forward somehow for us to be able to connect and chat some more about film. Vin DeSanti of Womp Stomp Films, thank you for joining Something Rather Than Nothing, and thank you, Bonita Rancliffe, special guest host.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ken, and Bo, thanks for really great questions.
Thank you so much. Take care now.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.